Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second edition of Babble on Babylon. This will be discussing Season 2, and if you caught the first episode of this, you already know exactly what this is going to be. If you didn't, this is going to be me and Jonas Kyratzes' sort of really meticulous walkthrough of everything that we thought about each Babylon season in order. He is a veteran to the series. It's been a favorite of his for a while. I am brand new to the series, so he has seen all of it, and I have only seen just the first two seasons. So each time I get a new season, we do a new discussion. So please welcome back to the program, Jonas Kyratzes. Jonas, am I getting any better at pronouncing your name?
Yes, that was very good.
Okay, I feel like, maybe by the time we're up to Babylon Season 5, I'll really have the knack.
No, that was actually quite good. That was good.
So Jonas, I don't know how we want to do this now that we're going into to the next episode, because the first time it was sort of you wanted to hear what I thought about it. Do you still want to hear what I think of the season first, or how do you want to go forward on this?
Yeah, very much. I mean, we can kind of set the stage a little bit for the audience, for anyone who doesn't exactly remember.
Oh, please do.
What season 2 is like. So, obviously, after all the events of season 1, culminating in the death of President Santiago, a lot of changes happened on Babylon 5. So at this point, outside of the show, one of the leads playing the commander, had to leave the show due to mental health issues, and we get Bruce Boxleitner as Captain John Sheridan, a very different kind of character now in charge of the station. Much more upbeat, much more sort of kind of classic leading man in some ways, or modern leading man, and a bit more gung-ho as well, a bit more of a soldier. I've often thought actually that Mass Effect, which anyway has a lot of influences from Babylon 5, it had this sort of, well, you could pick a war survivor or a war, I don't remember what the other term was, and it was basically, do you want to play Shepard as Sinclair or Sheridan?
I never thought of that, but yeah, I can totally see that.
So in fact, I remember I've read some of the notes from early on when Babylon 5 was created, and it's literally sort of described in those terms. Like Straczynski was wondering, do I go with the survivor or the war hero as the main character? And I guess he did both in the end.
Yeah, because I guess he'd made one decision, and then it kind of forced his hand, and so he went with the other one. Yeah,
he had to go with the other one. Season 2 is kind of the rising tension, really. Like everything that was set in motion in season 1 gets more and more intense all throughout season 2. Other than that, what else is there to say actually about it? I'm sure stuff will come to. Oh, we get a new character also in the form of Kefir, who was forced onto the show by the studio.
What?
It's one of the very few. Like after season 2, there's basically no more interference from anyone, but they wanted Top Gun in space. They wanted the cool young guy.
Okay.
And they got him, and then he was killed.
Yes.
Fuck you.
Yep.
So that was kind of that. It's like, we'll put him in, and they'll not even notice when we kill him.
That's great. I didn't know that. I mean, I knew the character got introduced and killed, but I didn't know the story of it.
Yeah. That was that. I think he was originally meant to be Japanese, but the studio thought that was too weird.
Okay.
So yeah. And I think they also wanted to introduce like a reporter character, and because they didn't have the money.
They sort of have reporter characters that come and go, but no permanent one. Yeah,
kind of a couple of recurring. They have one kind of recurring reporter character, but it's very subtle, and it's okay. You don't have to have that person on the station. And story-wise, obviously, it's about the rising threat of the shadows and the Non-Centauri War, where things really take a big turn from season 1, and fairly big political events start playing out, and Molari starts going to the dark side,
Yes,
losing his way in quite significant ways. All right, well, then let's get started. Tell me how you felt about it, what you liked.
So I guess I would say season 2, obviously, I think you and I have sort of traded tweets occasionally or talked about it a little bit as a slightly on a back channel. And my anticipation going into it was that season 2 would be very good, because I believe you said like 2 through 4 are incredibly strong, I think was sort of the expectation that I had. And that maybe I had sort of a vague notion that 2 wouldn't necessarily be like the very best season of Babylon 5, but it would be maybe like, in up in that tier. Coming away from season 2, I would say I have no idea how season 3 and 4 could possibly be as good as season 2. Season 2 was nearly pitch perfect for me. I mean, if I went back and watched it carefully, I'm sure I could find things that maybe I would that I didn't think were 100%, but like it would literally be an exercise in finding them. I thought, because I liked Babylon season 5 quite a bit, as you know. I mean, the only reason I suggested doing this show is because I knew you liked it and I really liked it. So obviously I thought season 1 was good, but season 2 was like a different level of good. I felt like pretty much every episode was doing something that I really wanted to see and was completely engaged in. And the high points of season 2 are just like exceptionally good. So it starts off pretty... I think one of the first places where I was like, wow, this is really getting kind of amazing is... in season 2, you start to find out some things that you thought were happening in season 1 are actually not what was happening in season 1. And these are even very little things that I alluded to in the previous one but didn't mention specifically. The part where Dr. Franklin is actually secretly smuggling people with psychic capabilities through an underground railroad, this to me was really remarkable. I don't know if you liked that or not. I mean, you can tell me what you think of it here, but
I love Franklin. I love that, and I love how you can almost see it. You can see that something's there.
Yes.
Before it happens.
Yeah. So to me, that was like really remarkable, because it was like you had seen so many indications that this was true, like things that look like a throwaway. Sometimes I don't know how smart the writers of this were. Were they very smart or supernaturally smart? And the reason I say that is because maybe they were just smart and they planned it, and so Dr. Franklin had a clinic downstairs and they happened to show that in a particular episode. Or they're supernaturally smart and they intentionally put that in an episode where there was another reason to show it, because they thought you wouldn't think much of it if they did it that way. Like almost like a magician's sleight of hand. So I have no idea which they did, but...
there's definitely stuff like that. There's definitely stuff like that in Babylon 5, where it goes like, ooh, here's a thing, here's a thing, here's a thing. And in the background, it holds up another thing. And you're like, you're paying attention to this one, but this is actually the important bit. And so, that is something they do.
So I found that to be really remarkable, because there were so many things that I had seen in the show that I did not think about. And when that episode hit, I was like, oh my God. Because so there's this one part, there's 2 very specific, very blatant telegraphs that this is happening that go right by you because they're so well integrated into everything else. There's the fact that Dr. Franklin's running this free clinic downstairs that's just kind of weird. It's in a back room and he doesn't tell anyone about it, which doesn't really make much sense, because if it was just a free clinic, you would think that it would probably, but you're like, oh, that's writing, whatever. It's like, nope, like that was intentional. The other thing was there's one specific main character who is like a very powerful telepath, apparently. And he's actually been in it before, but you don't know that he's a telepath. And in fact, he seems to know something at that time that he probably wouldn't have known if he wasn't telepathic. But you don't think about that at the time either. You just assume like, oh, the plot needed him to have talked to that guy and said something, so he must have just, that's what they wrote, right? So twice they got me. And then they like dropped the thing in season 2 and I'm like, oh my God. So that was was amazing. I just absolutely loved that. So I'll start with that. And react to that however you wish. But I noticed those two things very specifically, and I was absolutely delighted.
No, I agree. And there's such a, I don't know how to put this, because it's subtle, but it is there. And it's not just this, it's many things that are done this way throughout the show.
Yes.
But because it's subtle enough that it's not constantly in your face, you have the sense of the life of the show going on outside of the episode.
Yes.
Because if it's like big, like, dumb, Franklin has another secret.
Yes.
Then it's just, okay, there's going to be something. Like, blah, blah. But if it's just kind of there, then you have the feeling that, yeah, Franklin just goes off between episodes and does stuff. He's a person.
Yes.
And that works so well for me. The show does that multiple times. There are a couple of things where I think they don't manage to execute it as much as they wanted to, just because of random events.
Yes.
But most of the stuff that happens kind of works in this way, where it kind of gradually finds its way into the show. And I really appreciate that. And plus, I also just love Franklin, and I love having this very principled character on the show who's doing this because he believes in it. Again, something that I miss tremendously in a lot of modern television. People who just do things because they're the right thing to do.
Right.
Okay, anyway, go on.
Well, and I would also point out that from the perspective of the person watching the show, normally watching a show and engaging the active, like almost puzzle solving or video game part of your brain that wants to have some agency in the experience is normally not rewarded, because paying attention to details, in fact, it's the opposite. Most modern things reward you for not trying to put things together, because if you try to put things together, you find that they don't fit. Because the writing is so bad that literally, if you were trying to think about what would Dr. Franklin be doing in his spare time, you would realize that he couldn't literally be doing, like, there's all these things that just wouldn't work. But Babylon 5 really flipped that on its head for me, because I'm imagining that not only does everything that my brain was able to put together I caught, but also probably when I go back and watch it again sometime, knowing what happens in the future, I'll catch things I didn't catch because my brain couldn't keep them all in. So it's remarkable how it sort of turned it almost into allowing you to have that sort of active participatory engagement in the story, because everything you choose to pay attention to and remember is worth your while. And it makes you feel satisfied, like you're exploring it with them and not just this passive thing that don't think too much about it, because if you do, it falls apart, right?
Yeah, I think that comes from a respect for the material.
Yes.
Weirdly, science fiction doesn't seem to have very frequently anymore, which is very odd to me. I think we've talked about this before, this weird mixture of people wanting to write things that are speculative, but at the same time having almost like a weird contempt for that sort of thing.
Yes.
And you'll have shows that have, lots of lore, but they, so to speak, but they don't have any consistency, any sense of reality. And I think B5 comes from a sort of a more literary sci-fi kind of tradition where there's a lot of thought put into what is this world, and when we see the show, we kind of enter into this world and we see a segment of what's happening, and then the world kind of goes on, and then we're going to see them a week later, but in between it kind of has to make sense, to the degree that is possible with television. It has to feel like all of this connects and these people exist independently.
Yes. Well, and
it just
also
takes that respect for it,
I would also add the timeline. So like one of the things that's most disrespected to me in modern writing is the timeline. Like, things only exist in the moment and sometimes forwards, but they never exist backwards. And in Babylon 5, one of the things that they really nail is everything that was supposed to be there the whole time is. And that only comes from that knowledge of, like, we really built out what was supposed to be happening. And just because this particular episode isn't about the underground, like, telekinetic people's pipeline or whatever, it will still show up, because we know that if you were going to be viewing this part of the station, you would have seen evidence of it in passing, right? And that, like, respect for the timeline, where things that were supposed to be happening that we'll find out later about are actually happening is just, I don't know, to me, it's so necessary, and I miss it so much. So going back to Babylon 5 and seeing them do it just so flawlessly has been so satisfying.
Yeah, I agree. It's very enjoyable. Okay, let's go on.
Okay, so I guess it's hard to know where to start talking about this episode, or to start, sorry, talking about this season. But I guess I would say in this season, I do feel like one of the things that you brought up in the summary is kind of one of the best features of the season, which is getting to watch Mollari go from a fairly like jovial, like, you know, almost, he's not really ever been comic relief per se, but he is sort of played for laughs a lot of times very intentionally. Like he'll get the funny lines, or he's kind of like the very gregarious, you know, person who wants to celebrate and wants to have all these things, and his culture is his culture where he comes from as well. And they do a fantastic job, and the actor does a fantastic job of kind of going from that to being really a very central, very evil villain in a lot of ways, while never really losing the core sense of his personality, which seems to me to be quite an achievement, because it's easy to just like sort of, you know, totally change who the character is and play a different character. But at no point during this entire season do you ever really perceive a switch, but you know that the character has fundamentally sort of changed a little bit in that arc while still somehow remaining the same person. And that to me was also another big, really big achievement, I would say, for this season.
Yeah, Mollari is a fantastic character because you genuinely feel sorry for him in the beginning. He seems he's very lovable. He's kind of slightly pathetic. He's, you know, and he has this dream of restoring the golden ages of the past. And that seems completely harmless until you give him power to do so.
Yes.
And then you start realizing what that entails.
Yes.
What that was the golden age. And then you also start understanding Jakar a lot better, because it's like, yeah, that's why he's so angry.
Yes.
Because that's what that was.
Yes.
So yeah, that's very powerful, and the way these characters kind of start switching places throughout the season is very affecting, because it is a tragedy. It's not just, oh, this guy is evil after all.
Right.
Like, he seemed to be so nice, and then he pulls out a knife. No. This is Londo as you knew him, but when he has that power to realize all his dreams, it takes him to such a terrible place, and he knows. I think that's part of the genius of the performance.
Yes.
Is he knows.
Yes.
He doesn't show it around other people, but when he's by himself, he knows that he's wrong on some level, and he doesn't know how to stop it anymore.
And I would say that they did a great job of having that sort of switch happen when when he is presenting in the diplomatic chamber. He is so much harder than when he is actually not. You can see that you can almost feel how you feel if you've ever been someone who has to go give a presentation. You can almost feel that his adrenaline is up in that thing, and he's like trying to summon sort of a different personality than is the more conflicted version of himself. Like, he's trying to do that, and it's almost like very stressful for him to do so, and you can see that exhaustion when he comes out of it and is being seen in his chambers or with other people, or when he interacts with Veer, for example, who also, I thought, was played fabulously through this whole thing, because he is absolutely introduced as comic relief, and it totally doesn't end up being comic relief. Like, he turns out to be crucial, and having his own thoughts and concerns about this, being the underling in the scenario where he really has no control over what's happening.
Yes. Oh my God, Veer is introduced as the most ridiculous comic relief bullshit character. This is going to be nothing.
Yep.
And he is so significant to the show.
Yes.
He understands so much more than anyone else.
Yes.
And he is so brave in some ways. And that's going to be very significant for the show overall. And that's amazing, because it's such a Yeah, it's another magic trick, isn't it? It's you think that this guy is just this kind of ridiculous figure, and then there's so much more to him. Yeah, I completely adore this. I also have to mention Lord Reefer, who is apart from being very wonderfully sleazy,
Yes.
is everything that Londo isn't. But on the surface, they're the same.
Right.
And
Yes.
that's very fascinating that Londo is surrounded by these people who he thinks are like him, and then he realizes and re-realizes where the difference is, and that he has this inner conflict. He doesn't want to be this villain on some level, and other people are perfectly content just being the imperialists that they used to be, and that contrast is very significant, I think.
And they in having him, Mollari, and Veer all showing you different ways that Centauri probably feel about this conflict, right? You've got somebody who's all in it, who's just like, this is what I do, right? I am about being an imperialist, and I don't have really a lot of moral quandaries with that at all. You've got somebody who thinks that's what he should be doing, but in his heart struggles with it. Like, he can't quite commit to really being an imperialist in that way. He tries, and he succeeds in a number of ways, but it's a constant struggle. And then you have someone who really just can't handle it. He's like, that is not who I am. I don't feel comfortable being an imperialist at all. I feel too much for the people whose lives we're taking for this endeavor, and I just don't know what to do, right? Which I think is how you would feel if you were not an imperialist in a very imperialist society. Like, what can you do, right? It's a sort of helplessness where you're like, I pretty much know that politically I have no ability to stop this because, it's me and a handful of people, and all the people above who by far have the political power, they simply don't care about this, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it shows you a society with different elements.
Yes.
A culture that's not just one thing. There's not the bad guys who just believe this one thing.
Yes.
There's a variety. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I love Veer so much.
Yes.
Just for being, very small side note, Lost, a show that I love. We don't need to discuss it or anything because people go, oh, the ending. But it has a very similar thing with Hugo on that show, who's also kind of, the fat loser guy that everybody laughs about, and is basically the protagonist of the show at the end. When you realize, you look back, oh, this is basically a show about him.
I've never seen the show, so I have no idea.
I love Lost. Anyway, no, just for anyone, because there is a definite connection between the two shows, because the guys who made Lost were very inspired by B5.
I
and
see.
They have Mira Furlan in it as well. So there's kind of a little bit of a legacy there. And I love it precisely because he seems like nothing. And the first time you see him, you're like, well, that's kind of a ridiculous person. Why is he on the show?
Yep.
And then it turns out, sometimes the ridiculous seeming insignificant people are actually quite important in their own way to how things turn out.
And I think it also, intentionally or not, it does a good job of showing that, like, the both with Mollari and Veer, their kind of like bumbling comedic nature at the beginning is largely because there is no consequence, right? They're not put in an extraordinary circumstance. They're just kind of ambassadors on a station that no one from their race cares about anyway. And it's sort of, I assume, just kind of like in the US when you're like, like you're the ambassador to Iceland. It's like everyone knows that it's just a job you got assigned. We know we're not going to war with Iceland anytime soon. We know we're not like going to be negotiating any really important treaties. And if we were, someone else would go. Like, you're just there, right? And then you get to see how none of that can stand anymore once this becomes an actual serious point of tension. These people who, in a lot of ways, were not ready for this and not expecting this are forced to. You get to see how their personalities change, where they're put under that pressure. And I think that's one of the things that makes Veer so sympathetic and interesting, is because what you're seeing is he, in some ways, is reacting the way that we all hope we would react in that situation. When the screws are put to us and the easy path is something distasteful, Veer is the one who's trying to find a way to not go down it, while everyone else around him is, right? And that, I think, was pretty cool.
Yeah, I agree. I exactly, you basically said it. And Jakar is the other side of the coin, somebody who was always in it.
Yes.
He's never had any choice but to be in it.
Yes.
And we've seen kind of a darker side of him as he's struggling to take revenge initially and to kind of, but that's also the very interesting thing, of course. When you see, when Morden comes to Jakar, Jakar wants power.
Yes.
But all he wants is for his people to be safe.
Yes.
And after that, he doesn't care.
Yes.
He has no desire to expand.
Yes.
Which is why he's useless to Morden.
We should talk about, in fact, can you describe that for people who aren't thinking of that scene right now? Because, yes, the part where Morden goes and talks to all of the different ambassadors to see what it is that they want is really interesting now that we know kind of what's actually happening. Could you actually go into more detail about that? Because I think that's really fascinating, too.
Yeah, so Morden is this mysterious character who we realize is basically an ambassador for the Shadows,
yes.
which is this ancient, very dangerous race. And he goes to all the ambassadors of the various species and offers them power. And, it basically says, what do you, well, that's the question that you always ask.
Yes.
Right? What do you want? And some of them turn him away. And the very important differences between Jakar and Mollari. Mollari has this big dream of, rekindling the golden age and conquering and expanding, and there's no end to it, essentially. Whereas Jakar just wants, to create kind of a safe place for the Narn to exist. And after that, nothing. Like,
yes.
Fine, we don't care. We don't want to invade everybody else. We don't want to build a giant empire. We just want people to stop killing us.
Yes.
And so we see very different answers to this question. What do you want? And what's useful is what Mollari wants, because this fantasy of the golden age, well, it kind of expands forever, and it has no limits and can be used to stoke conflict, which is what Morden wants, what he can use. So yeah, that has tremendous consequences. But the fascinating thing is that with Jakar, once everything goes to hell for him, he has tremendous dignity. You start seeing a very different side to him, which isn't villainous,
yes.
Which is wise and which is principled, and you see a totally different person there, and he's very moving. Suddenly, he goes from this kind of antagonistic figure that he used to be to someone that you really care about.
Yes.
Also, without really changing, you just realize, yeah, that's Jakar.
Yep.
Like, he was always like this. He was always, the reason that he was so angry was because he was fighting this kind of desperate war. Even when they were on top in a way, they were just terrified of what ends up actually happening.
Well, and I think also kind of appropriately, I would say, given the history of our planet, he is the most religious of the people involved in the conflict, right? Like even among a lot of his people. And I feel like going through that kind of a period, I feel like religion is definitely something that comes out of that, because they literally had nothing else, right? And religion a lot of times will come out of desperation because people need a strong moral compass. They need a strong reason to assume that there is hope when it's pretty clear that there isn't hope. And so I liked that his character was portrayed as being a fairly devout follower, because I feel like that's very plausible. Like, that's a very plausible thing to have happened to this race. And the other place where we see religion happen a lot is in the Minbari. They kind of have a sort of split. They have like a religious they have a religious, I think they call it caste, right? They have a religious caste,
a
warrior caste,
and a
worker class,
well.
Yeah. And so they, have more of that balance, presumably, again, because they're I guess, their prosperity, because the Minbari are like one of the most prosperous races, it seems, when you look at their ability, their technology, their longevity, their link to the Vorlons, who, are the most ancient, I guess, that we know about, and so on. They seem like they have the luxury of not needing to have just one thing or just be born out of this real crucible. They seem to have more of a like evolved society, whereas it feels like the Narn would have had to have been really like will have to bore down and suffered a lot to get to where they were today, which to me seems like a lot of their people might be devoutly religious at the end of that. That's just my read on it anyway. And so I liked that aspect of the character.
I mean, you see their planet at some point, and it's just strip mined. It's hell.
Yes.
So yeah, very few people survive that without some form of religion or other very strong ideology that can guide you. And that's very significant. And the relationship between Jakar and religion is something very interesting that's going to evolve throughout the show. And also his role amongst his people.
Yes.
Which is already kind of hinted at now, that he is both very much a leader, but also kind of not quite like everyone else in his own way. And the same is true of Delenn, right? Like you get the sense already that there's lots of fractures inside Minbari society. They're not that monolithic as they appear. There's a lot of internal problems and hypocrisies and things that are not that simple. And as the pressure mounts, those cracks start getting wider.
And in fact, that might be a good segue into talking about Delenn, because there's a lot of stuff in season 2. So the outset of season 2, we actually find out that we finally find out why the Minbari did not colonize Earth, because they basically had the option to, by all accounts in the story leading up to this point. No one really seriously believes that the Minbari could not have conquered Earth if they wanted to. So the backstory is going through season 1 was basically that nobody really knows why the Minbari decided not to conquer Earth. They just didn't. They got to the point of being able to do so and then just simply negotiated a truce at that point. They were like, we surrender, we're not going to attack anymore. And that's just where it was left. We find out at the beginning of season 2 that the religious caste, I shouldn't say the religious caste, the Grey Council, which is technically made up of a third, I guess. So it's like a third religious, a third warrior, a third worker.
Yeah.
They discovered, sort of on the eve when they were invading, they in fact captured the captain from the first season. That's why he ended up getting stationed on Babylon 5, in fact. That's a whole other story. It's not really that interesting to go into, but there's a reason why that happened. They actually were analyzing his psychology and like him, as they wanted to like investigate humans, basically. And they discovered that he actually possessed a soul that was Minbari. And they realized that actually humans are just Minbari souls. They go into humans sometimes when Minbari die. And this had been a mystery to them because they actually didn't know where some of their souls were going. And I guess we don't really find out about this specifically in season 2, but I guess the idea is that Minbari can perceive souls much more directly than humans can.
There is an explanation for this, but I don't want to say what it is.
Yes, sorry.
There is an explanation for this. That's very interesting.
And mind you, souls, this is not an arbitrary plucked out of the air thing, even at this point, though, because we've actually already had an episode featuring a person who collects souls. So we know that souls are real because there's literally an episode where a person collects souls in little balls, right?
Maybe.
Okay.
None of the characters can agree on whether that's actually a thing, or whether he's just copying them.
Okay.
So it's never said throughout the entirety of the show. Is there such a thing? Because there are materialist explanations for everything that happens on the show.
Okay.
Pretty much.
So sorry to overstep there, but point being,
but it's inside of a belief system that exists definitely on this show.
Yes, and there is an episode where there's a thing called a soul collector, and this, actually Delenn, who is the Minbari ambassador, is the person who at the end of that episode takes the spheres that person has enclosed these souls in, if you believe their souls. I mean, it's something that comes out of a person and captures their essence somehow. She breaks them and sets them free. So you kind of already know, like, again, just, it's really hard to overstate just how well this series discusses its own ideas a lot. It doesn't ever just bring them up once. It always wants to talk about them more than once, and it's so delightful, so that you're not just like, oh, well, that soul thing, well, that was just here as an explanation for this one thing that happened, and we're never going to talk about it again, and we never talked about it. It's like, no, it's always comes up, and it probably came up before if you were paying attention, and it will probably come up later most of the time, and it's just, again, really great, just in general.
Yeah, in fact, the Soul Hunter realizes something, if I'm not wrong, about Sinclair.
Yes.
And about some connection to the Minbari, and says they're using you.
Yes.
And all that. So yeah, he realizes that something is up there. So we have a hint quite early on that something is up with Sinclair and the Minbari.
It's remarkable.
And some older connection. And we're still going to see more about that in season 3.
So, focusing in on Delenn a little bit, what she decides... So she is a member of the Grey Council, which, as far as I can tell from what we've been told in seasons 1 and 2, the Grey Council more or less has authority to set direction for Minbari society. Like, for the most part, it seems like if the Grey Council says do this, then you do this. So they're sort of an aristocracy, or I mean, aristocracy is the wrong term. They're a very limited representational democracy. Yeah. Like, each of their castes gets 3 total people to decide the fate of their entire civilization. That's how they do things. However you want to look at that. It's unclear. I wouldn't actually say representative democracy. They're more like a representative
theocracy.
Like, these people are chosen more than they're elected, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. The point is they have 9 people, 3 from each caste, and these people get to decide what's going to happen. Delenn is one of these. However, she does not let anyone know that fact. So when she was on Babylon 5, being the ambassador to the Minbari, nobody is told that she is a member of the Great Council. Is that correct, John? That was my understanding in a way.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, she is acting as ambassador almost as a disguise, because she believes that it is important. I mean, she is a member of the religious caste, so she believes in a lot of, like, prophecies and faith and things like this, that she is guided to do something on Babylon 5. So we're sort of led to believe that she is there for a reason that has nothing to do with actually being an ambassador. Like being the actual ambassador is not the important part of her presence there. And what she does at the beginning of season 2, so the end of season 1, beginning of season 2, is she actually turns into a part human. This is like the chrysalis, right? So she decides that in order to create a bridge between her and the humans, she is going to take on human characteristics. And we are not told how this is done. She simply she builds one of these crazy, like, crystalline structures that are built to do things or something. We have no idea what these are.
Okay. All throughout season 1, by the way. She's constantly building that from episode to episode.
Yes.
I really like that.
We have no idea what this thing is. But at some point, it basically turns her into a chrysalis, like a caterpillar would have, that turns into a butterfly. And she emerges during season 2, right at the beginning of season 2, as part human. She still looks a little Minbari. I think she still has the bone... She kind of has the bone thing on her head, right? Yeah. That Minbari have. But her facial features are more human. She has hair, which Minbari do not have. They're bald normally. And
a lot of trouble getting used to it.
Yes. In fact, one of the greatest episodes, like humor things, was where she is so frustrated because this hair just keeps growing and she doesn't know what to do with it. So she asks Ivanova, like, what do you do with this stupid stuff that comes out of your head? And she's like, well, you do, you wash it, you trim it, put it in rollers.
Yeah. And at the very end of that, she wants to ask Ivanova about periods.
Yes.
Yes. And Ivanova's face and reaction.
She hates it.
Oh God, how do I explain this to an alien?
Yes.
was extremely funny. Yeah.
The whole thing with that was great. And yeah, anyway, that's kind of a nice just stuff that happens that isn't really main plot point oriented, but it just flows out of the main plot point of her trying to become more human.
Yeah.
As a result of this, I don't have much to say about this, but maybe you do. As a result of this, she is sort of exiled from the Grey Council. It's unclear exactly why, but the impression that you get is that they did not agree with that. Like, in other words, the Grey Council didn't think she should probably turn into a human. They wanted her to become ruler. This is what I gathered from the discussion. They were like, you should not go back to Babylon 5 and become a human. You should stay here and be the ruler, like the main ruler of the Grey Council. I guess there's a central figure, right? And she doesn't want to do that.
Yeah, she's a very respected figure in their society, clearly, but at the same time, she has her own ideas.
Yes.
And it's also kind of tied up with religion and with these prophecies and their prophet Valen and all these things.
Yes.
But she believes that certain things are happening now. The shadows will return. All these conflicts are coming, and this is necessary. And the interesting thing is that the rest of the council doesn't. Like, in a way, they're this theocracy, but they've become so sclerotic that they don't really believe in their own prophecies anymore.
Yes.
There's a lot of hypocrisy going on there. And Delenn is like the only one of the few who genuinely believe this. And so she undergoes this transformation, and it has real consequences for her in terms of that society.
She loses a tremendous amount of power in her society for doing that. I mean, she basically went from being she would have been one of the most powerful or the most powerful person in her society to someone with almost no power. Like, basically, like most Minbari now, when they interact with her, there's actually an episode specifically where one of the Minbari, who is not, her or, I can't remember his name. What's her attaché's name? I'm blanking on it.
Lanier.
Lanier always is very respectful to her, but we see another Minbari in one of the episodes basically treating her, basically like just full-on racist. He just like despises humans, and he thinks of her as a human, and to him she is just like nothing. She is a horrible like mutant or a half-breed or something. And so you can see like she goes from literally like being one her saying yes away from being the most powerful figure in their entire society to being like, in the eyes of many Minbari, like literal trash, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it. It just shows her tremendous dedication to her cause.
Yes.
Which is a theme all throughout. That also you already have in season 1, her belief in, people who follow a quest and at any cost, and she is doing the same thing. And it has a tremendous cost for her.
So one of the things that that leads directly into what I think was probably the best episode of season 2 and just the entire show so far, and I have a hard time imagining it will be beat, but maybe it will, which is Comes the Inquisitor, which was, I think I tweeted at you immediately after watching it. I just said, holy shit. Like, because that episode totally blew my mind for a number of reasons. I don't know if I should describe it first or if you should describe it first. Maybe you should describe it first. You think so?
Because I really want to. I love hearing you talk about it.
Okay. So, I think I've been. We don't know each other that well, but I already kind of get the sense that you are probably more forgiving of science fiction than I am. Just in general, I'm a harsh critic of science fiction because I think I don't tend to love it that much. I come at it the same way I come at most stories. So the fact that it is science fiction has no particular boost to me. And so I tend to be a harsher critic than people who are sci-fi fans because they're getting something out of the sci-fi, and I could totally appreciate that as well. So I'm below, not just you, but most people who would engage with something like Star Trek or Babylon 5 or whatever, they're getting an extra thing from it, which is they like the spaceships, they like whatever, and I don't dislike those things, but I just don't get a boost for them. So I tend to come at these things as just like, what's the story content is really all I'm there for at the end of the day. And so I tend to be kind of hard on things like that are classics. You know, a lot of people would talk about, for example, the classic episode of like Star Trek Next Generation where Picard like is tortured and they ask him how many lights there are, like these sorts of things, right? And usually when I see those kind of classic episodes, they just don't do very much for me because I tend to compare them back more towards like classic plays or something, and they don't really hold up as well. Like they're just not as good as other things that I've seen along those lines, and so I just don't get that excited about them. I'm like, yeah, okay, that was an okay episode, but I'm not gonna go raving about you got to go see that thing the way some people would. So this episode,
I get that.
Okay,
yeah.
does that make? I'm just giving you the background.
No.
Okay.
I mean, the thing is, I've told you that I get a plus from something being science fiction.
Yeah.
Like I get a certain joy out of just seeing spaceships.
Yes.
But on the other hand, I'm also a very harsh critic of a lot of
Yes.
it, especially in terms of storytelling and also like, I don't want to say ideology, but like philosophy. Like a lot of the philosophical things depicted often just rub me the wrong way. So you can have the coolest space shootout, but and it's not that I have to agree with it, but if I have issues with it, that can just break it for me because, I mean, if you just do, hey, we're in space and we're shooting stuff, I can do 2 hours of that.
Yeah,
just
sure, yeah.
Fun. But if you try to say something and then you end up saying something absolutely horrific or stupid, I do have problems with that. So I just want to clarify kind of where I'm coming from. And I completely understand what you mean. Like, I've always thought the point was to say that things like science fiction or fantasy should be measured with everything else and can be as good as any other kind of drama.
Absolutely.
And I think what's happened in the last decade or two is that people have replaced all the other stuff with only speculative stuff, but the quality doesn't matter at all. And that is also something that alienates me a lot. I don't understand this. The whole point of saying I like Babylon 5 is to me to say I like it in the context of also liking many other things that are not science fiction. Anyway, but go on.
Yeah, so just establishing that up front that, maybe I'm going to be a little harder on these sorts of things in the abstract sense because I don't really care about the sci-fi part. I can't necessarily grasp for that as a reason why I want to see, a slightly worse version of Thing X, but it's in space, which is an extra plus. Right? I get that anything you watch is a collection of stuff that you respond to, and so I'm not even trying to say that this is good or bad. I just mean that's just how I look at it. This episode absolutely astounded me from start to finish. This was the first time I think I've ever seen anything that demonstrated to me why I might want a classic Star Trek episode. So to me, this was Babylon 5 showing how to make the kind of Star Trek episode I would have watched, if this makes sense. Mm-hmm. It feels similar to the sorts of things that I'd seen in Star Trek when I'd seen the show. I'm talking about the show, not the movies, obviously, but I mean like the show. It has a lot of the same trappings if you look at it like without like just if you take away the details that make it work, it looks similar in trappings. There's a fetishism for some other time period that's not sci-fi, right? It's got like a British, which Star Trek and stuff love to do. They love to do, we go back in time or we're in the holodeck and we're Sherlock Holmes or whatever. Like they love that sort of thing. It has a test or a conflict that some supernatural or more forceful being is putting on them. I thought of Q a lot when I saw this episode, right? It has a central character who has to show like a certain element of, in her case, it's not humanity because she's not a human, but I think we know we're talking about like the souls of people in general, humanity here, in order to pass this test, etc. It feels very much to me like if you just looked at the superficial layer, it feels a lot like the kind of thing that Star Trek used to do. And I never like these Star Trek episodes. Ever. I've never liked a single one of them. So this episode was incredibly instructive to me because I was like, oh, wow. Like, actually, I do. It's just no one's ever done one this good for me. So here's what absolutely stunned me about this. Thing one. In most of these Star Trek episodes, there is nothing interesting going on. The test is blatant. The way it is passed is obvious. And the actual intrigue to the viewer is zero. There's no mystery to you watching the thing. There's no aha at the end of it. There's no puzzle you were putting together. It's just whatever. In this episode, despite the fact that, like I said, I like to be an active viewer, I'm always trying to engage with it. It's almost like they use the fact that I assume that Star Trek episodes will not have an underlying deep, meaningful reason for everything to pull the wool over my eyes. At the outset of this episode, the Vorlon ambassador, who we know at this point is very powerful. We don't really know very much about their race, but we sort of know that Vorlons are far more advanced than we are. And, to a first approximation, we kind of just assumed that if the Vorlon just wanted to destroy our station and Earth and everything else, they just could. They're just not that interested. And the reasons why they're here are not really clear to us at this time. At this point, we're sort of thinking they want to maybe battle the shadows because we've heard that they were involved in a conflict in the past. And so we're kind of starting to get an idea, but we mostly don't know. We just know they're very powerful and very mysterious. At the outset of this episode, Ambassador Kosh, who is the only Vorlon we know, basically tells Delenn that he doesn't really have faith in her yet. He's like, I don't know whether you're the person who is actually going to be able to fulfill this prophecy, and I want a guarantee. He's basically asking her to prove herself. And so he says, I have summoned an Inquisitor, and you will know if you have passed his test if you're still alive afterwards, right? I mean, is that a fair summary of the outset?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Okay. So, first of all, I love that because it was just a nice, intriguing setup to the thing, right? But then what we see is when this Inquisitor arrives on a Vorlon ship, he comes out and he looks like someone from the 1800s. He's wearing standard, I don't know if it's a morning suit. It might be a morning suit, but it's the kind of suit you would wear at least at some hour in England on the street. The long tails, a hat, a cane, right? And it feels very Star Trek in that way. That's the kind of thing they would do. But in Star Trek, there's usually no reason. It just happens usually in those episodes. Why? Because Q snapped his fingers and brought you there or whatever. So I thought in my head, well, there's no reason for that. They just thought that was cool to have someone in this outfit, and they totally snowed me on it, right? Now, because I'll talk about each of the things I loved about this separately, let me fast forward to the end. At the end, you find out that actually, no, that had to be true. The reason that the person is dressed like they're from the 1800s is because they are from the 1800s, and the reason they were from the 1800s is because they are literally Jack the Ripper, who has been... The reason he was not caught was because the Vorlons took him to use as his Inquisitor because he evinced the properties of someone who believes they have been chosen for a prophecy, but was not chosen for a prophecy, which is historically potentially accurate, and the perfect choice for someone to get that information out of someone, which absolutely blew my mind. I don't know if that blew your mind, but I was like, that's one of the smartest things I've ever seen.
No, I love that, and it's perfectly done, and and it's such an ideal choice because it's someone who inflicted tremendous misery,
yes,
in the name of a cause,
yes,
and the Vorlons would take someone like that and show him what he did, and then have the perfect Inquisitor. But at the same time, you're going, hold on, you're testing people using Jack the Ripper.
Yes.
You're not that nice, are you?
Nope.
So yeah, and there is a tremendous sense of danger to the episode. I really like that. You're right that these kind of you have to pass a test episodes are not that powerful sometimes, but in this case, just from the beginning, there's something incredibly threatening about it. You just feel that there is definitely a scenario here where Delenn dies.
Yes. Yes.
This could happen.
Yes.
This probably has happened before any number of times. And that gives it a lot of weight. Also, Lennire's reaction. Lennier is so differential
yes.
To the Vorlons, to Delenn, and he's so freaked out by it that you start thinking, well, this is not good.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, go on.
So, when you look at it in the context of that, which I think is absolutely brilliant, it also solves a major other problem that I typically have with these kinds of things. Everything that is said during the interrogation that the Inquisitor performs, or I should say the Inquisition, obviously, it's an Inquisition after all, someone is an Inquisitor. The dialogue was fantastically well written. I would say a high point for dialogue in this series, in fact, because they managed to play the characters off each other in a way that felt perfectly natural, very dramatic, and still consistent with the fact that one of them's from 1800 and one of them is from 20 something. I don't even know I don't remember when the date is, but like that they're different cultures even. One's a Minbari and one's a human, right? The entire time, the dialogue felt absolutely pitch perfect. And at the time I was like, oh, it's just great drama. It feels great. It's really well done, just like a great play that I would have seen, because it has that feeling. It's two people on a stage arguing with each other in so many words about the nature of faith and purpose and meaning and all these sorts of things. And it comes out great. But it manages to take that extra step by saying, no, like, actually, if you go back and you look, and I did this in my brain, I'd love to go watch the episode again, because I just had to kind of rewind and do it. Unlike the more hollow version of the same episode, each thing that was said comes from the heart of the Inquisitor. Like, once you know that he was a mass murderer, everything he says makes sense personally, right? And that is so different than something like Q, where it's just empty words coming out of a character. These, I think they may have had a more consistent quality to them even before you realize that, because the writers knew who the character was and why he was saying them, which is never happens in the Star Trek version, and I think it's why it falls so flat for me, is this was not an abstract conversation. It was a concrete conversation, and that made all the difference to me, I think.
Yeah, and it's the intensity of it also comes from that, right? Because for him, he's talking about something very real.
Yes.
He's talking about his own sins.
Yes.
But he's also right in that the question of leadership as well, right? How dare you undertake this? How dare you say,
yes,
I will lead the world into this great struggle? What makes you think you're up to it?
Yeah.
What makes you think you're not going to be another dictator?
Or another me?
Oh, yeah, or
right?
another me, another
it's
mass
self.
murderer,
It's self-loathing, right? It makes so much sense, right?
Yeah. I agree. That is a perfect choice. It's a perfect choice, and it's extremely well executed as well. The performance is fantastic, and just all three actors, I think, just they radiate intensity throughout this entire thing in such an amazing way, because it really gives them something to hold on to, and every character has this role to play in it. And of course, Delenn is. I can remember when he challenges her, saying, what will happen if she dies? And she says, another will take my place, and another, and another. And she says this with such conviction that I get goosebumps just thinking about that. This real belief in that this isn't about me. This is about what we have to accomplish. And if I fail, another person will do this. I know that she has this faith that someone else will step up, and the struggle will not be abandoned. and it's not just about the individual, and it's I mean, it just comes off as so like her believing it so intensely. It is such a powerful moment to me. It's breathtaking.
And that part where we get the resolution of this Inquisition, that she passes the test, actually has two parts to it, and both parts make philosophical sense. Like you said, the collective nature of it, that she doesn't want to be the person who does it. She wants it to be done, which I think is the first philosophical statement. It's like a true hero in this, for what the Vorlons are looking for, must want the thing to be done, not because they want to be the person who does it, but because they really just think it needs to happen, right? So
that's a perfect
part
way
one
of saying it. Yeah.
But part two is this sort of fundamental compassion, because you could see a brutal person who wants a horrible thing still going that route, right? I mean, there's nothing to say that just because you want something done and you don't need to be personally responsible doesn't mean that the thing might not be horrible, right? So there's another fundamental aspect, that's the compassion. The thing that same scene, what she's talking about is the fact that she will sacrifice herself just to save the captain, who she doesn't feel like is responsible. He hasn't chosen this. He should not be suffering. That fundamental compassion, being the second component, tells the Inquisitor, like, not only do you not care if it's you or not, but you also care deeply the cost of your success. And in a way, like, I feel like that's such a clear-headed, philosophy to have as well, that much like you, I don't care if a work chooses a philosophy that I happen to agree with, but I just care whether or not it wasn't shallow, right? In this case, they even chose one I would agree with. I'm like, that's a very sane philosophy to have at the end of the day, if we want to talk about it, right? Like, I think that was actually a science fiction show saying, here's a very reasonable philosophy to guide you, right? In a way.
Yeah, I agree, because it acknowledges the cost and it acknowledges the difficulties, and it has this answer of belief, not necessarily in something external, but in life and in people. And Delenn is just sort of the incarnation of that, and it's delivered. Again, these performances to me are just earth-shattering.
Absolutely,
and very, very deeply moving for me.
So, I don't know if there's anything else you want to say about that episode in particular.
No. I mean, I think it sets up a lot of what is to come, a lot of the questions. It gives you the sense that big events are coming.
Yes.
And they will be difficult, and they will require certain individuals, to play certain roles, to be leaders. But it's not just about them as individuals either. It allows for space in all of this. It's not just you are the chosen one.
Yes.
You are a significant figure, but there's more to it than just that.
It also feels like it sets the proper overtone for the Vorlons as well, because they are clearly a very forward-thinking, very intelligent, very powerful race, but this is not the kind of thing that a particularly compassionate race would ever do. It's very violent and very dangerous. They were fine with her being killed, if that's what was going to happen. It seems, anyway. So you also get a little bit of a, I'm not so sure about these guys, feeling to it, which feels like it's sort of going to propagate forward as well. So I feel like it sets the tone about them in a way that's good, because we don't know that much about them yet either.
Yeah, I agree, and it is very revealing. And obviously, the next episode also has something very revealing about the Vorlons.
That's what I want to talk about next. Do you want to lead that one, or do you want me to do that?
Well, okay, Fall of Night. That's the last episode of the season, and one of the things that happened there is that what happens? So a non-ship takes shelter near Babylon 5. Sheridan offers to protect them. The Centauri are not pleased.
Yep.
and through a series of events, Sheridan fires on them. In self-defense essentially, but creates a huge political crisis, which then leads to an assassination attempt on him, where he is forced to jump out of one of these transport vehicles that go through the station. And to save him, Kosh reveals himself, leaving his encounter suit, and everyone sees something different, and they all see religious figures, essentially see angels or various figures from their mythology, except Molari, who sees nothing.
Yes.
And that, of course, raises a lot of questions, because if they were just angels, you'd be okay, they're angels and our myths of angels come from them or something.
Right.
But everyone seeing something else suggests something else is going on here.
Yes.
Something both positive in some sense, but maybe also sinister.
Yes. So I guess what I would say is these two episodes back to back help establish that thing I said about the Vorlons, where it's like they leave you with a very good, uneasy feeling. It seems like they're generally on our side, but we also, there's just a nagging, like this is a bit off feeling to them. And I felt like, these two episodes back to back totally hammer that home, because you now know they've been messing with our timeline, right? Like they took Jack the Ripper, who knows what else they did. We see them as angels, so that means they were, back there in the early days when people were writing the holy books on Earth. They were around doing something. We don't know what, right? And apparently we find out that, with the exception of the Centauri, because we don't really know, because Molari can't see them, which may just be because he has no faith, or it could be because their race has no faith. I don't know, right?
Or because he's personally affected by Morden.
We just don't know. Right, maybe he's fallen into shadow, right? So we have no idea why he doesn't see it, but for everyone else, they see their religious icons, so we know they've been messing with everyone else's too. And so it does have some interesting connotations, and I don't know what happens to the rest of the season, but it definitely does feel like there's a certain angel devil thing they're kind of making with like Vorlons and shadows, where they're sort of saying like, okay, who you end up in league with here is sort of good versus evil, but in some sense, they're not clearly, the shadows may be sort of clearly evil to a certain extent, because you've never really seen them do anything particularly positive. But on the other hand, the Vorlons, while generally positive, are not clearly positive. They're certainly not what humans would consider angelic at all in the modern age, but they are maybe what humans would have considered angelic in the primitive age, which I thought was brilliant. Like the old god who was like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna smite all the children and send the plagues and stuff, like that guy.
Yeah, they
right?
They are much more like that, like the original angels, who are terrifying.
Yes.
And very dangerous. And they just, in this case, we already saw it with Deathwalker. They just blew her out of the sky because they were like, you're not ready for this technology.
Yep.
And they've demonstrated it throughout that they are scary.
Yes.
And we have to wonder a little bit. They definitely seem to be on our side. They're against the shadows, certainly.
Yes.
But there is definitely a lot of doubt there about what exactly is going on with them. And their methods are certainly very questionable.
Well, and I really do think that it's a very good choice, at least so far, to say if we're going with something fairly mythological, it's really hard to argue that our modern mythologies are any good for storytelling. They're kind of garbage. The old mythologies are way better, right? So if you were going to pick angels, you'd pick Old Testament angels if you could, because there's way more conflict and nuance in that than there is in just like some always good, pure version of it that's been sanitized. So,
and of course, an influence on the show is Babylonian mythology. That's
Okay.
the name.
Okay.
In which we have a story of the conflict between chaos and order.
Ah, yes.
And that's, I think, a very relevant way, ultimately, of looking at the shadows and the Vorlons.
I see.
In the Vorlons are, they're much more order than they are good.
Okay. I see.
Religion and ways of thinking that, and whereas the shadows, they blow a lot of shit up.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we find out more about the shadows as well and what their belief system is. We actually fully understand at some point where they're coming from. But yeah, that is much more relevant, I think, than good versus evil.
Yes.
But the interesting thing is that, of course, the Vorlons depicted as good versus evil.
Yes. Yes.
They may be more a force of order, but the way they portray themselves is as goodness.
Right.
As judges and saints even.
Yes.
And holy creatures. So yeah, that's definitely very complicated and definitely should make us question them in certain ways. And their demands. And yeah, just the fact that they're perfectly willing to kill people is already, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely at odds with a more pure modern sense of divine good and evil, where we've sanitized out a lot of sort of the original ideas. I mean, most ancient religious things did not go that way. Greek mythology doesn't look anything like that, right? No. So if you go back to the classics in Western literature, you wouldn't find anything approaching divine good and evil, it seems. And it does seem more interesting to me too in general, just as from a storytelling perspective, because at some point divine good and evil gets a little bit boring.
Yeah, well, depending on the take, but
yes, that's certainly true.
No, this is very interesting, and it is going to be developed quite a bit further as the show goes. So, shall we talk about some of the other elements of season 2?
Yeah, I think I've covered all the things that I had particularly strong reactions to. Obviously, like I said, season 2 I felt like was incredibly strong, and in fact, there's some things we didn't mention. Maybe you can bring those out now, but like a couple other things was like we find out more about like the Psi Corps as well, and things that have to do with what's going on with them, and like I said, the Underground Railroad and all that railroad and sort of things, and also the powers that Talia Winters has, and those sorts of things. We have a lot more stuff coming out about that, and I loved everything, but I think I've already mentioned the things that I thought were like really standout. So we'll go from there.
So yeah, definitely the Psycho is definitely very interesting. I'll spoil very slightly. The Talia Winters arc does not go quite as far as you'd like it to go.
That's too bad.
Because the actress left at some point.
Oh no.
So they were like, oh shit. So they do stuff with it, but they were in a very tricky situation there. So it I think that could have gone further, and eventually it doesn't go quite as far. It makes sense within the overall story, so it's not like I feel like it's a total disaster. But they're just these occasional things where just the reality of the real world kind of interferes with your plans. However, it does all end up making sense, so I'm relatively okay with it. But I really do love the stuff that happens in season 2 with her and how sinister the Psi Corps is.
Yes.
But it's so interesting because it's a very intelligent exploration of this question that what if you had telepaths? How the hell would society function with people like that around? Because their powers would change everything from business transactions to just your everyday life, right? And the Psi Corps is clearly not the solution. While at the same time, it's something you could imagine coming into being.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's fascinating because I feel like this is almost something that nobody would do nowadays, where we tend to have a very binary understanding of oppression, where people are just oppressed or not. And the interesting thing is that the telepaths are oppressed.
Yes.
Within the Psi Corps, it is possible, if you conform to the Psi Corps, to gain enormous power.
Yes.
Even over the outside world, while your life is still utter shit if you in any way deviate from that. Which is a very complex situation, because you understand someone like Bester, from his perspective, he's fighting for his people.
Yes.
He's kind of a nationalist, and he just wants to defend his people as he sees it. But at the same time, he's an incredibly sinister figure who oppresses his own people as
Yes.
well.
Yes.
So it's very complex. It's not that easy to just say, oh, villain, and here's the if because with something like a lot of forms of racism, the answer is just like stop being racist.
Right. Right.
But here there is this giant question of power and how to handle it in society and suppressing the abilities with drugs. And so it is a genuinely difficult problem, and the structures that arise from it have a real complexity to them, where a group of people can be both oppressed and in this case kind of dangerous, or rather the organization can be dangerous, while the actual people are clearly in a being oppressed, being persecuted, and all that. So there's something very interesting there, and that's why I particularly appreciate Bester as a character, because he thinks that he's the hero. Like,
right.
He
Yes.
is
Yes.
the hero from his perspective. He even has this kind of slightly smug attitude and is dismissive towards the
Yes.
silly normals and so on. And it's just, yeah, in his head, it's the Bester show, and
Yes.
everyone else are these dumb people who don't get how brilliant he is.
Yes. Well, and also, I feel like the show does a good job exploring all of that, because by having the backstory, by having Ivanova's backstory be that she watched what happens to somebody who doesn't want to be part of Psi Corps, and Talia being someone who was raised by Psi Corps, their interactions and arguments help bring out all of that conflict and all of the things you just said in a way we can really see, right? It's not, that stuff is not really happening off screen. In fact, there's an episode where there's the child who has latent telepathic abilities, and Ivanova and Talia have effectively this argument about who should take care of her and so on. And you get to see a lot of that. And one of the things that's really great, and it sucks that Talia Winter's arc doesn't get to finish, because I think I could kind of see where they were going with it too a little bit. That's really unfortunate, but you get to see them become friends as well, right? You get to see them kind of reach a common ground about, yeah, the Psi Corps really isn't good. Like, it was good for me, and it does, people do need something, but maybe this isn't the something. What can we do about it? And the Underground Railroad's part of that, and all those sorts of things. So I feel like the show does a great job presenting that somewhat neutrally. Bester is fairly evil. Most of the things that you see him do are pretty bluntly bad. But like you said, from his perspective, he's just trying to do his job, what he thinks is the right thing for him to be doing in his position. But he's not the only person you see. You see so many other sides of this thing. There is one thing where they kind of talk about how bad the Psi Corps is, which is the advertisement. So during one of the episodes, which they had way too much fun with, the entire episode is told from the perspective of basically a 60 Minutes show that's doing a profile on Babylon 5. And the entire thing is shot from a shaky cam, handheld news camera footage. And there's an ad for the Psi Corps that is pretty great.
And what is the name of the episode? And now for a word, as in, and now for a word
from our sponsor.
Sponsors.
Yes.
Yeah. And yeah, I really like this. And there's a later episode that's also kind of from a TV perspective, and it's very interesting then also comparing them, because there's already a kind of propagandistic drift here. There is,
yes,
there's some very, very unpleasant undertones.
Yes.
To how the Earth television basically depicts a lot of this stuff. And that's also, maybe that leads us also to the other big thing of the season, which is the also increasing descent into authoritarianism on Earth.
Yes.
Which started with the conspiracy of season 1 and is now just happening full bore all throughout, and is getting worse and worse and worse. And that's something that's okay. I remember some people saying, "Ooh, this is over the top. This isn't realistic." And then already, like, I remember then during the Bush administration years when basically somebody basically suggested what is the Night Watch, like somebody had, like, they wanted to basically institute that at some point, except back then liberals still believed that this stuff was bad, which now probably wouldn't be the case, but back then everyone was like, no, you cannot do this, we shouldn't all be snitching on each other, which now is basically what Twitter is for.
Well, let me interject something that I found even more striking, which you may not have noticed because the last time you saw Babylon 5 may have been prior to this. In America now, there is literally the totalitarian push to have the ability to declare things officially misinformation. In Babylon 5, that is literally the term that is used by the totalitarian censors to describe the things they would like people to point out and eliminate. They say misinformation every time. They're like, people are spreading misinformation. And they use it to describe the exact same things that Americans today are describing, which is not really misinformation. Like, a lot of times it's just a conflicting viewpoint. They will call it misinformation, right? And so I 100% can see people at the time going like, oh, this is ridiculous. Like, whatever. I get maybe in Nazi Germany or something, or maybe in the Stasi or East Germany. But, like, actually not. Like, everything they did in this is stuff that you now, not only did they get the terms correct, which is scary, but they got the frog boiling correct, which is, they don't suddenly show up as a bunch of armband wearing people marching through the station. It's like one at a time. And it's like a little, like, innocent thing at a time until it's unstoppable.
In response to some tragedy, some terrible event, we have to defend ourselves, gradually, and then it becomes more and more normal. And it is eerily prescient in that way.
Very eerily.
What's eerie, I suppose, is that at the time these values of these values of freedom and civil rights and all these things that exist, and privacy and all these things were kind of taken for granted in the 90s. They were like, this is what we all believe. And now there are people who would identify as I'm a radical communist, but I despise free speech, and
and people should be fired. It's like, you're a communist who thinks people should be fired? What does that mean?
Like, what has happened to my world? What is going on? Like, it used to be, not to get too political, but it used to be that people like me who are radical communists would point out the hypocrisies of liberalism, where it's like, you believe in free speech, but you are trying to do this. You believe in freedom for everyone or equality for everyone, but then you are doing this. Now it's like, no, we want less of these things. So, but you see how that happens. You see that a society can abandon these core values. So what you're seeing in Babylon 5 is completely believable. It's like a society that previously definitely embraced these things suddenly just starts not embracing them because there was this big event, and then there's these bad people everywhere, and we had an assassination, and then gradually, one step at a time, you thought, well, at first everyone thinks, well, having these people in the Night Watch, that's kind of ridiculous. And then after a while, well, they've been there for quite a while now, so I mean, there was a time when people were like, what, the Department of Homeland Security? This is ridiculous. We have to abolish that immediately. Now, well, it's been around for like 20 years.
It ain't going anywhere.
So in the same way, this entire society gradually descends into this authoritarian mode, essentially, and it's very uncomfortable. Like, it's very creepy to watch it happen, and I think it's done very well. Yeah, there are parallels to Nazi Germany, but I mean, there's parallels to this thing happening everywhere.
Absolutely.
Wherever it's happened, it's come like this, a step at a time. And it connects very well to the question of comes the Inquisitor, which is leadership. And what are you willing to do to accomplish your goals? And that's a very difficult, real historical question that's very significant, I think. Even to someone like me, if I think of like the Russian Revolution, you accomplish this big thing. Okay, you're through the bad guys. You're building a new
Yeah.
society. We have to defend the revolution. Okay, we're going to kill these guys who are against
Yeah.
the revolution. Now we're going to kill. Oh, you're against. You're a Trotskyist. You're
Yeah.
this. You're that. You're an. Okay, we're going to kill everyone. Okay, everyone. Okay, we're going to kill all the old
Yeah.
Bolsheviks. And then at some point you're like, oh, we killed like all the people who did the revolution as well.
Yes.
And then you've lost basically everything you accomplished, or a lot of what you accomplished. Some people are going to get upset at me saying this, but the point is that no matter how you look at it, in all these great historical conflicts, whether they're moments of crisis like now, or revolutions, the question of leadership is enormous.
Yes.
And the question of why are we fighting for these things, and where does it stop? Where do we have to say,
yes.
okay, you know what, we have to draw a line here, and even if it's very important for us to accomplish that, we can't accomplish it in a way that destroys everything we value, because then that'll take everything that we built as well, ultimately,
yes.
in the long run. And that's a lot of this question, right? Like, great, you're going to fight this big war to whatever, fight the shadows, fight this, fight that, but what's going to come of it?
Yes.
What are you going to build, and what are you going to abandon in the name of accomplishing that? Or you're going to defend Earth, but how far are you going to go? What structures are you going to build? And what will there be left of Earth ultimately as a society that you can care about at the end of that?
And I think so. I would connect a lot of what you're saying to like a disagreement, or rather an argument one could have about, say, like Machiavelli or something. So there's the opinion that the ends justify the means, which is kind of something that if you actually look at how that's gone, it's not well. When you start to say that we're going to say that we need to do certain things that may be very distasteful because we are trying to get to point X, and getting to point X will require us to do them. It seems somewhat logical at the time, but historically speaking does not seem to actually go that way. And then there's the counterpoint to that, which is that, like, look, the means really determine the end. So you can't really think of it as we're going to have a society that does these horrific things for a little while, and then afterwards they'll suddenly stop when we have accomplished X. Doesn't seem to actually work. What actually seems to be more accurate is you get a choice of means, and your choice of means will determine the standing structure that you're left with at the end. And so while you can say that maybe some of those means will go through more horrific times if they're the policies that you enact, they have to be policies that are stable through to the end. Like, they have to be policies that can stably still exist in the final version of your thing, because otherwise they're going to be there. So if they're somewhat lawless, somewhat barbaric, somewhat whatever, that is the society you will end up creating at the end of the day. And I think we tend to convince ourselves out of that seemingly true thing when we look at the past. I don't know if you agree with that, but
yeah, it's a very difficult question, and it is something that the characters are going to be faced with in the coming seasons, which is okay, nobody's ever fought a war or a revolution, whether capitalist or communist or whatever, agrarian, and it's never been pretty. Okay, it's never been pretty. There's no such thing that is pretty. Sometimes they're necessary. I would say historically, these things, sometimes it comes to a boiling point. It comes to a point where, a turning point where you have to act, and the action will not be nice. Whether it's the American Revolution or the Russian one or whatever, you can pick many ones historically that have been transformative at points where maybe the transformation was necessary, but it can be very, very ugly. But yeah, that's then the question. How many of these things can you justify? There will be some actions that you undertake. Another example is, of course, the American Civil War that also kind of feeds thematically the character called Sheridan, who's actually supposed to be a descendant of a Civil War general, and so on. So there's definitely these Civil War themes there. Horrifying war, horrifying things done during these wars. Some of it's necessary. but how far, and how do you stop, and
Exactly.
and and yeah, and what do you sacrifice? What do you which of your values do you sacrifice? Because if you sacrifice a lot of them, you cannot reach that thing that you were trying to do. There
Yes.
comes a point where you make that impossible. That's also something that we see with Londo, because Londo, he has these values and Rifa does not.
Correct.
And he empowers people like Rifa, um, but with his actions,
Yes.
and is then also left with the consequences. Like he
Yes.
might do things differently, but people like Rifa would not. Again, without wanting to super alienate all the audience, but there is something interesting to think about in terms of like the communist revolution, the Russian Revolution, figures like Stalin versus figures like Lenin and Trotsky. And sometimes people say, oh, these were all the same. Or if you look at the French Revolution, all their figures are sometimes like,
Right.
oh, these are all bloodthirsty tyrants.
Right.
They weren't. They had very different goals. But the danger is that you say, we're going to do this. We need all the people that, going to help us do this. And then you end up with some people like Stalin,
Yep.
who are not that, they don't actually necessarily care about your values in the same way that you do. You may have stopped at some point and said, you know what, we won, no more killing. They won't. And it's not necessary that you're going to be in power at the end of this. They might be in power at the end of this. And there's a huge danger. And a lot of things have gone horribly wrong from that. And then, yeah, with Londo, we see exactly that. Like, if Londo was, the emperor, maybe things would, he would still be an imperialist. I would still not support his actions, but he might execute them very differently. He might be slightly more merciful. He might have a different vision, but power doesn't necessarily end up in your hands, or things don't exactly turn out that way. And the choices you make, then the sacrifices you make in terms of your own values, can have tremendous consequences for how it all turns out. And you may not get what you were imagining. You get what you wished for, but you also get something quite different on top of it. And I think that's a legitimate danger for our heroes as well, in a way. That's why they have to be tested. That's why we have to see that they're not like that. And still, it's going to be a challenge for them, I think, ultimately. And I think the way that Babylon 5 engages with these historical questions is very interesting, because you can discuss it as a fictional history and apply the lessons of real history to it, which you can't do with a lot of shows, because a lot of shows exist in this nowhere space where if like 2 episodes later, someone's going to decide, oh, yes, we have an infinitely large fleet of super destroyers that will destroy the universe.
Yes.
And where's all of this coming from? And here it's much more like this is a fictional history, and we can look at it, and it's not a metaphor for any one period of human history, but we can apply things from human history to it, and analyze the actions of these historical actors as if they were real.
Yes.
And that's I find that very fascinating about the show, the show is a fictional history, like 5 years out of the future, in which certain events happen. And it's also not, at the end of those 5 years, everything isn't resolved or clear, because history doesn't just end there and that's just it. It's, stuff will keep happening afterwards. Stuff happened before, but here's 5 crucial years of this future history. So that's an element I appreciate very, very much about the show, and I can't find a lot of examples of something like that in television in general.
And they do a good job of having, because one of the things that's underlying everything you just said is, what is the actual value system that you're propagating? Because when you decide to do things like declare war or those sorts of things, you have an underlying value system that's trying to guide you as, when does the war stop? Why did we declare war? What are we fighting for? All these sorts of things. And to your point, if you do a poor job either selecting those values or communicating those values through leadership, you end up in situations where, if to take the Lenin and Stalin example, if you have something that has some negative aspects and some positive aspects, but the descendants take only the negative aspects, right? Then that is how you can spiral, instead of pulling out of the bad parts that were necessary to go through that time period and ending up in just a positive or mostly positive area, you end up in a mostly negative area. And the difference there is just going to be what values were you able to spread in a way that your leadership cannot naturally organize around these bad elements, right? And, probably a lot of it's luck. I don't know that humans are that good at doing this sort of thing overtly, but in Babylon 5, you get that same sort of thing. You can see that, Jakar is freedom is the value that they are most concerned with. And they are, in some ways, willing to do probably exactly as heinous of things as a Centauri, but they're doing it for freedom, which, as you said, adds sort of a natural limiter. Once they feel like they are free, they will probably just stop. They probably, they might still create some problems now and again, as you saw them do, but overall, they will not create, cataclysm, because freedom just doesn't require the cataclysm. On the other hand, we must have lots of servants that serve us, and we will conquer many lands. Okay, maybe you can have some examples like the Roman Empire that aren't the worst possible thing, but overall, most of the time, it's not that great and can go south very quickly. And you see exactly how that happens in Babylon 5, where it's kind of a trivial step to just annihilate worlds and enslave people. Because, at the end of the day, what in your value system was really there to suggest you shouldn't? Not much, right?
No, it's just this desire to return to a completely imaginary golden age where you were all powerful and respected and all of these things. And you see the same thing happening on Earth.
Yes.
The humans aren't that much better in this regard. And they also kind of retreat and they become more xenophobic. They think more about Earth and Earth first and blah, blah, all this stuff.
Yes.
And there's also an element clearly of imperialism there with the humans. You see this with the episode Gropos, where they get involved in these wars.
Yes.
And so there's clearly a very strong militaristic element to all of this. And although partially the people in charge maybe don't even realize, they're kind of ridiculous. Some of them, you have the sense that they don't realize what universe they're playing in.
Yes.
There's a lot of arrogance on the behalf of Earth Force. A sense of superiority to the other species and civilizations that's really not earned, because the Minbari already kicked their asses.
Yes.
And could do so again, but even that loss has been spun into an almost victory. They couldn't defeat us.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, that is literally a conversation that gets had at one point between people who don't seem to acknowledge the fact that the Minbari surrendered kind of arbitrarily. That I remember that occurring, I think, in season 2. There was literally an offhand conversation. Maybe it was on the Gropos episode. I don't know.
There is somewhere definitely an episode.
I don't remember where it was.
Of this kind, where the Earth military kind of pretends that they almost like they won, like we held out long enough and something like that. But yeah. Yes, I don't want to just be negative about the Soviet Union here. So there's definitely also a strong parallel here to America going through, obviously, its own flirtations with fascism and with hunting down communists. There's a McCarthyist kind of atmosphere, definitely that's breeding.
And with the invasions too, I think, although it's not an exact parallel to the U.S., I would say that Gropos episode does sort of hint at the casual imperialism. So the Centauri are classical imperialism, or like Romans or something I think of more when I think about what they're doing, right? Whereas the Gropos invasion felt a lot more like the U.S. doesn't really know very much about this place somewhere. maybe they have some people who do, but they're not really particularly listening to them all that much. They decide through some diplomatic channel that they should invade because someone there wants them to, and then they just do, right? And it felt very like American in a way where it's like there wasn't any real attempt to figure out whether that was a good idea, whether the people there really wanted that or not. It was just sort of, I'm sure it's for the best if we invade, so we did, which feels very American, modern American to me.
It's this 1990s
Yes.
Clintonite interventionism.
Yes.
It's like, oh, we're going to go there. We're going to drop some troops.
This would be great.
Bomb some people. Somebody in the CIA said this was a good idea.
Yes.
Somebody's going to get rich of this.
Yeah.
And of course the place gets devastated, but also the troops, the people who get sent, everybody dies.
Yes.
Like every single character we've seen in that episode is dead at the end.
Yes.
For absolutely nothing.
Yes.
When you realize that there are much, much bigger things going on in the world, much more dangerous things, but those are insignificant essentially to the leadership on Earth, to the president.
Yes.
Because he's possibly also involved with them. But
well, and they don't seem like the part that struck me as very authentic too about that is sort of the lack of general understanding about even the place they were invading, which again feels very like the politics of invasion over the past 40 years or so have become, at least from Americans' perspective, way too abstract. Like it's very much of they will do something like bomb Syria without really knowing very much about Syria. The vast majority of the people involved in that chain, from the people who elected the representatives to the representatives themselves, don't have a lot of actual knowledge about what they're doing. It's very abstract. And I felt like that came across well in that episode. I don't know if that was their intent, but it definitely felt that way. And so it felt very authentic. And, of course, showing that the price that you pay was good in a sense. But also, I would say, if I was going to criticize that episode, we didn't really get to see the negative effects on that planet, which maybe we will in the future. Yeah. But
no, we won't. I don't think so.
Yeah,
but
that was unfortunate.
I agree. That would have been better. Yes. There is that American tendency to just be sad about the soldiers that get killed rather than what happens.
Yes.
Where they go. But it still works for me because it's kind of from the perspective of the station and the people on the station.
Yes.
So you just get the sense that, yeah, the Earth Force and the Earth Alliance and all this, and none of this is going to in a good direction right now.
Yes.
And we're increasingly uncomfortable. Everyone is like, even someone like Sheridan, who's very much a military guy, and his discomfort grows as the show goes.
Yeah.
Because he's kind of he is someone who I think that's the whole point of him, that on the surface he appears quite like, gung-ho, jingoistic military guy because he's this big war hero. But he's actually more almost like a classical liberal figure. He isn't very strongly involved in politics necessarily, but he believes in the system and sort of these civic values. And someone like Franklin is much more critical, much more uncomfortable with war in general.
Yes.
Whereas Sheridan is more okay with it in principle, but then as it develops, you see him gradually being like, and you already realize he is actually part of kind of a group of people that are anyway quite uncomfortable with what's going on and are trying to kind of do something internally in the system a little bit. So that's actually something you realize fairly early on, that he is already involved in all of this, but his discomfort grows more and more and more as he goes, and it becomes unclear how much he will be able to accomplish inside the system by I think he has a belief that the system can work, and I think that belief is gradually eroded all throughout the season, and that'll obviously continue into season 3.
Which also comes back to what you were saying before about leadership in a lot of ways, right? Like, it's like that if essentially militaries are chains of command. So at the end of the day, if you have strong leadership that has a good moral compass, then the military can accomplish the things that perhaps he would want them to, like the kind of war that he was fighting, where they had to, and it was trying to survive, as opposed to what it's sort of shifting into, which is not that at all, right?
Yeah, and it's very interesting that it also has these different perspectives on it, right?
Yeah.
So you have characters who are much more critical of war in general, and then you have people who are like him, and everyone kind of has a different perspective. It's not just this one simple thing, and then they're just put into this historical situation where they all kind of have to act in some way. Like the pressure is mounting, and eventually that means you have to act on your beliefs, not just state them.
Yes.
And I think that's what happens throughout the whole season. It just keeps building. And then we see at the end of the season that it's really slipping into authoritarianism, and there's all these threats, and you're going to have to stand somewhere. You can't just keep talking about it.
I liked the interaction in that Gropos episode. Speaking of all of this, I really liked the interaction because we find out for the first time, I believe, in that episode, really, maybe it was mentioned earlier, but we never saw it, that Franklin's father is a military general. Like he's a high-ranking military official, actually. And I liked the understanding that they were able to come to, because they're sort of diametrically opposed. Like one is basically someone who just tries to like heal people, and one is someone who tries to kill people, in a sense, right? If you had to boil it down in the bluntest possible form. And they have a superficial argument about that, and then a more heartfelt bond over that, in a way that they kind of both realize that like they're both sort of doing the same thing at the end of the day in terms of their approach to what they're trying to do. And I thought that part of that episode was very good as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it kind of evades the argument a little bit by making it a personal thing, and they don't really resolve, but I guess they can't resolve the philosophical argument between the two of them. Right. They can never really go there, and they manage to kind of get along.
Yes.
And it's interestingly played, because I think on some level you agree with Franklin.
Yep.
Because he's very principled, but then you understand his father, and you're like, okay, yeah, it'd be good to heal this rift.
Yeah.
But then you also see the consequences of the father, who's a very principled person, obeying his orders.
Yep.
And the consequences are quite bad for everyone involved.
Yep.
And even though he's a very good person, clearly, the fact that he agreed to do this in a way is immoral. Ultimately, is the orders that should not have been followed.
Yes.
And of course that is going to be a major theme: the question of when do you follow orders and when do you not follow orders? Because you have a responsibility at some point to say no, I can't do that. What else is there? We
have mined a lot out of season 2.
but it gives you a lot. That's what's so interesting. Like I think you can come at this from very different political convictions, I guess, as long as in those convictions you have a belief in freedom as a value. I think that's kind of core. If you don't believe in that, then you're probably going to be like, well, President Clark's a good guy.
Right.
But I'm sure I have very different political beliefs than you do, and but still we have this core of valuing freedom as a goal of society, and it's and so I think you can come at it from a lot of different places, and that is again because it's not a moralistic kind of show where the universe seems to run on one set of principles, morally speaking, but it's history and it's people acting inside of history, and you can look at them and be like, this is a good person, but he's doing the wrong thing. You can say that of Sheridan too in many ways. He's not always, a saint. He's not always right. The show doesn't always like agree with him, and he's his perspective is the only perspective. As with the Underground Railroad thing, for example, I think Franklin is the one who in a way is much more ethical. Ultimately than Sheridan, and Sheridan kind of comes to understand that, but still, and that complexity is very, very interesting to me.
Which is also what makes the show worth talking about, like you say, is that it feels a lot more like something, that someone could watch in a college class and then have a legitimate discussion about and hear people's reactions to, right? Like it doesn't go out of its way to cabin off the interpretations you could have. It provides a lot of richness and texture and allows you to come in and make arguments about something that happened on the show and how you perceived it, which is something that you increasingly couldn't really do much of in media that's increasingly blatant or designed specifically only to be interpreted one way or to be propagandistic in a way about something. You can't really have a very useful discussion about it because there isn't much to discuss, which is what's, another real strong point of this series.
Another thing that is not fashionable anymore, but which grows out of where the show came from, I think, the history that it came from, the time period, is this deep-seated mistrust of the intelligence community.
Right. Yeah.
You have this, these secret these organizations, sometimes actually quite faceless and possibly illegal ones, but that act within the state. And this is something that used to be, I think pretty much everyone agreed that this was a pretty big problem.
Yes.
In the post JFK kind of era, everyone was like, yeah, this is not good.
Yeah.
And these people are getting way too involved.
Yeah.
And of course, that's something that exploded even more in the Bush years, where this is very creepily prescient of a lot of this.
Yes.
Even though it's just, I think, applying stuff from the past to the future. It's using stuff from like the 60s and 70s and projecting it to the future.
Yes.
But then it actually applies very well to things that we have seen happen.
Yes.
And it comes from a set of values where even characters in the military, like Sheridan, because the military ultimately serves democracy, not in the sense of, we're going to go spread democracy in other countries.
Right.
But they're not this independent actor that just does whatever the hell it wants and manipulates events and so on to its own ends. So so the show there has an investment in these values of freedom, privacy, democracy. That now seems, every hero is a CIA guy now, and it's like, it's good that he tortures dudes.
Right.
And that way, I guess the show is also a historical artifact from a time when these things were commonly held beliefs. It was more normal to think that, such people are very questionable.
It's true that, I had not considered that until you just said it, but it's true that like the one thing that doesn't really happen much on this show is the or even at all is like that the Night Watch or like the sort of the back room kind of dealings of the Psi Corps as well. I'm not sure like who you would put in the shadowy organization set of things. They are not really examined with an open mind. It is sort of understood that generally these things are probably bad right from the beginning. And you're absolutely right. Like that probably comes from a time when nobody would have thought that there was much point in having like a serious introspective conversation about whether like the CIA is a great idea or things like this. But that's not what would happen now. Like now, if you wanted to make Babylon 5, you would have to bring viewers over to the idea that maybe the FBI and secret courts are not necessarily in the public's best interest, which is a terrifying idea. But we do now have to have that conversation again, which is terrifying, but probably true. And you're absolutely right. If you look back at Babylon 5, nowhere they take so much effort to view sides and intricacies and all these things of so many issues, and that one never. They're just like, this is just bad. And it's interesting to think about, like, that's not probably how they would have done it today, really.
Yeah, they would be like, oh, they're a bit creepy and they use bad methods, but they actually help us in a lot of ways. And this show is much more like, no, they don't. Because historically, no, they don't.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it doesn't matter where you come at it, like how you come at it. They can come at it from a lot of different political beliefs. Like Sheridan has very different beliefs than Franklin or whatever. and they would all be like, nope, this is not
Yes,
good.
exactly.
Like, it doesn't matter whether you're like a pacifist or
Yeah.
classical liberal,
Yeah.
communist, whatever the
Yeah.
hell, even conservative, you would look at this and be like, no.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I do value that about the show, this sense of hostility to that.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and yeah, it was totally lost on me the first, when viewing it. But no, you're absolutely right. They never really look at that. There's no lens there. It's just it's bad. So, is there anything that we missed that you wanted to talk about? There's a lot. There's stuff with Garibaldi. We haven't really talked about him at all. I don't know that there was anything that like stood out super much. There's some interesting things with Dr. Franklin that we see starting to happen in this season, but I don't want to spoil them because really season 3 is where you kind of find out what's going on there. And I haven't gotten enough through season 3 yet. I've gotten enough episodes in to know there's things that you would talk about in season 2 if you didn't mind spoiling season 3, but I don't want to, so we'll save them for next time. But what do you think?
No, I think we've covered most of it. I quite like the episode. There's 2 episodes I quite like that are big turning points. The Coming of Shadows with the Emperor.
Okay.
I thought that was very successfully tragic.
Yes.
A man who's been a figurehead his whole life, trying to make a difference and failing.
Yes.
That was very powerful. And
in Jakar in that episode has a really good, like, you can kind of see the tragedy of his life played out in that episode, because that's the one where he finds out that maybe there is a chance for peace between his civilization and the Centauri, like from the top down, right?
Yeah.
And he, you might argue, kind of deludes himself. Like, it may be that really even that wouldn't have happened, because, how really able is the Emperor to convince a bunch of Centauri that that's the case? Who knows? So maybe he's even a little bit delusional, but he really wants that. And I think that informs his character a lot. Like you said, he really does want the freedom. He doesn't want to go kill all the Centauri. He says he does sometimes. And you can tell how much it has hurt him that he really does want to lash out in that way. And he was going to kill Malari at one point, if I remember correctly. There's a thing. So the anger is there, but you can see the relief that if they were just given the guarantee of freedom, at least for him, that would have been enough. And then his dreams of that are crushed almost right away.
Yeah, but it says a lot about him that he is actually willing to reach out if he had the opportunity.
Yes.
He just doesn't.
Yes.
And then, of course, there's the big episode in the Shadow of Zahadum, where we see Sheridan's backstory and all that. I quite like that episode. I like Bruce Boxleitner's performance there a lot. I think we start seeing that the actor is capable of a lot more than just being the good-looking good guy. There's a darkness and an edge to it.
Yep.
I like that it gives him a very genuine reason to behave in a way that is unethical and illegal.
Yes.
And then makes a very strong argument that you shouldn't do that.
Yep.
That you shouldn't do 24. Mm-hmm. That's not how good people behave. Mm-hmm. You don't torture the terrorist. You don't.
Yes.
Because you're not a terrorist.
Yes.
And I think, and yet you can really sympathize with him, because his emotions are so raw, and his pain about his wife and all of these things are so real. And of course, it also gives you this creepy feeling of things tying together, and where did Morden come from, and what else is going to come from that.
And you might imagine that he learned a lesson there as well. I mean, we'll see what happens in future seasons, but one of the things that, to elaborate on the rest of that episode, he is sort of at the point of wanting to torture this guy. He never really tortures him per se in a clear-cut way, but more or less, like, he's basically held, for all we know, without food and water for 10 hours. It's definitely getting to the point where it's inhumane. He doesn't really have a legal basis for it, et cetera, et cetera. He's definitely bending the rules, which happen to be sort of on his side. But Garibaldi, at this point, because he's not connected to the situation at all, has, basically says, look, the rules here are very clear. Like, I'm not going to be a part of this. We don't hold people without a reason. So you're going to have to let him go or charge him with something, like, like a very like legal, a very like honest policeman kind of character in this case. And eventually, but Sheridan just dismisses him. He's like, all right, then you're gone. Like get out of here. I'm going to deal with this. And one of the things that happens at the end of that episode is they sit down together, and Sheridan says, here, like, I'd like to reinstate you. I'm sorry. Like, that was wrong. You were right. I was wrong. And he literally says there won't be a next time. Like it's like you're hearing him say that, like, I learned my lesson. Like, I haven't really been put in this position before. And now that I have been, I realize that I acted poorly, and I'm not going to do it again. And so I felt like you kind of could see him maybe learning a lesson there that might come into play later. I don't know to what extent it will, but it was very interesting, and I liked that resolution to it as well.
Yeah. And again, nowadays in television, people torture each other all the time over everything.
Yes.
They so casually have the heroes just strap someone to a chair and pull off their fingernails.
Yeah.
And then it's like, sometimes they turn out to be innocent. Often they don't. And
Yeah.
it's like you're monsters.
Yeah.
Why can everyone so casually turn into an absolute monster? And there's no questioning it. And yeah, here at least there's, you get why.
Yes.
But it's not right.
Yes.
It would have been wrong for many reasons in this case. There's also like strategic reasons that it's wrong in this particular case. And there might be bigger consequences. But fundamentally, it's just you've lost your way here.
And the guy is guilty. So they aren't saying it's wrong to do because he was a good guy. He's arguably the worst guy in the series, like the most villainous villain, but they're just like, you should not torture him because that is not productive and is not the way that is not the way forwards if our goal is to, is to win a moral victory at all. This is not going to do it, right?
And during the episode, Sheridan becomes less Sheridan.
Yes.
He loses himself.
Yes.
It doesn't matter what the other guy is, whether he's guilty or not. In this case, he is, like you said, pretty much the worst person on the station.
Yes.
And probably one of the most dangerous people in the universe.
Yes.
But if you do this, you will lose who you are.
Yes.
You will stop being Sheridan. You will stop having the values that you have. And that's the most important thing. You will destroy yourself essentially by doing this.
Yes.
And that's something, I don't know, that's something very significant to me. Something I've thought about a great deal just lately, frankly, as well. As we head through weird, turbulent times. I think about this, that even when I agree with certain political movements or people, I find myself quite worrying that they don't really have this investment in principles and in freedom that I have.
Yes.
And I don't necessarily want the world that they're going to build, because I think that world contains the seeds of its own destruction in a way. And if we get there in this particular way that you want to do things, there will soon be no space for anyone who disagrees even in the slightest way.
Yes.
And that's not something insignificant.
Yes.
That has very, very real historical consequences and has had so in the past. And you can have the best intentions, like, as again, someone who is a socialist, I fully understand how you can go, we must support the revolution. We must support the revolution.
Right. Yes.
We fought so hard to build all this. And even there's so many good things. Like, I can easily defend many good things about the Soviet Union, until its very end. Like, they accomplished fantastic things. But to me, freedom is such a core value. And that's obviously the thing that they lost.
Yes.
And so, but I can see how you can do that. I can see how you're defending something you really believe in, and step by step you jettison some core values to defend the other stuff. And then the consequences are ultimately terrible and self-destructive. So this stuff is, it hits me quite strongly when I think about it. Even now, revisiting the show, I'm like, this isn't some insignificant little thing that's just an exercise we do in a college class to talk about theories. It's very real.
Yes.
It's and very important. And I wish it was discussed more, essentially, in art. I wish that these values were taken more seriously. And people sometimes go like, oh, show us pretentious, blah, blah, blah. And I think that's partially just because it takes these ideas seriously. And we've gotten used to a culture in which most cultural artifacts, most works of art are either like drenched in cynicism or they're like outright sinister.
Yes.
But even when they are, shall we say, not outright reactionary, they're often drenched in so much cynicism. They can't express any real principles, or if they do, then they don't have this layer of introspection of looking at it, but of also questioning then how the principles are executed and implemented in the real world. And I just really appreciate that it has this multi-layered approach where it has principles, but it also questions how you then go into the world and fight for those principles.
Yeah, and it shows the principles in a lot of ways. Like so it doesn't take like shortcuts. I don't feel like that the kinds of cynical things you're referring to, I feel like a lot of times they also I don't even know that I mind things that are cynical if they are cynical in a complete way. A lot of times the cynicism that you see is almost just like it's like a Happy Meal cynicism. You like it's got like one or two toys inside that are the cynicism, right? It's like it's all boiled down to some simple thing. Like Picard goes to visit someone in a trailer is the extent to which it wishes to be cynical about poor people in that universe, and at no time does any other element of at all in the universe that they describe suggest that those things have happened or that they've happened for a reason or what the reason was or who was responsible or anything. They just go like, I think I want to say that poor people are bad, but nobody needs to watch a show to tell them that poor people are bad. What they need to do is watch a show that either shows them some non-obvious thing about why poor people exist in a world where there are also non-poor people, or, like you said, shows you a way out of it, like suggests new solutions that we haven't tried or like ideals that we could aspire to that would get us out of there. But simply suggesting that something is bad that everyone already knows is bad doesn't actually provide much value to anybody, and it's certainly not entertaining either, at least not to me.
Yeah. And there's a great thing about Babylon 5 that has, to me, been very influential, which is that the show has, shall we say, a certain set of principles. There are ideas that it cares about. It's not like completely empty on that front, but at the same time, it's executed through a series of characters who aren't all the same.
Right.
And not just the villains, but also the heroes. The heroes all basically tend in the same direction, but they differ and they grind up against each other and they question each other and they interact with each other in complex ways. And this is not just about the political stuff, but also faith and religion and philosophy and all these many things, even the understanding of relationships or love or all of these things. And that's something that I value in art, having characters who are not just opposed to each other, but distinct in interesting different ways that give you a variety of ideas on a theme so you can think about it while observing the story, where it's not just, oh, this guy is right and all these other guys are wrong, but it's like there are certain things that we believe in, but how do we get there? And this person believes this and this person believes that, and there's a fruitful interaction, but a dialectical approach essentially, where you have these different positions and they all interact with each other and they give you something greater, and that's, I think, pretty core to the way that this is built as essentially an ensemble show.
Yes,
and it's not the Sheridan show or something.
Yes,
to
call him the main character would probably just be an error. It's like there's actually many main characters, and you often see a significant part of an episode he will either not be in or it is not from his perspective. So it would be hard to identify him as a protagonist in that. As the protagonist in that sense.
Yeah,
there's a lot of who is the protagonist at any given time from a narrative point of view is very fluid.
Yeah, it can go and just be, for a while, it can be the Veer show. And,
yes.
Or Delenn or whatever, but it can focus on other people. Yeah. Okay.
So,
I think we
yes.
covered everything I was interested in.
Okay. Well, I guess I'm working through season 3 now. I'm not very far in, like 2 or 3 episodes or something. But I imagine it won't take me very long to get through. So hopefully we'll be back here for Babylon season 3 shortly. Jonas, it's been an absolute pleasure as always. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. And I guess I would also say that since the last time we talked, I had the opportunity to listen to Gospels of the Flood, which was your... I want to say that's the latest thing you've done. I mean, I know you work on games all the time, so probably what comes out when may be different, but...
I've done the Eternal Cylinder since, and that came out since then.
Okay.
But I mean, I wrote that like 2 years ago.
That's what I was assuming. I didn't know like what the... Okay.
Yeah.
So the Eternal Cylinder may be the latest, but Gospels of the Flood I listened to. I haven't played Eternal Cylinder yet, but I definitely will. Gospels of the Flood was fantastic. So if you enjoyed this conversation at all, you would probably really like it, because actually the entire thing is just a beautifully written story and extremely well produced as well. Like, the production values on this thing are insane. You can go listen to it now for free. I will put the link in the description below. But it's absolutely wonderful meditation on a lot of the same stuff we've been talking about. It's not as focused on sort of big machinations. It's more about the personal sort of perspective and experience of things like faith and meaning and why you do what you do or what your morals are. But I absolutely loved it. So thank you, Jonas, for writing that. And I would highly recommend anyone watching this go check it out, because I think you'd really enjoy it. If you liked anything we talked about today, you would absolutely love, I think, that.
Thank you. I'm really glad you enjoyed it. And yeah, if you like Babylon 5, all these conversations, you're probably gonna like it. It really is quite adjacent.
It felt similar. It did feel similar.
It has many. I don't know. It has a lineage that somehow connects it. Like it comes from a similar place. And like I said, Babylon 5 to me, I imprinted on that thing very strongly.
Gotcha.
And I have my differences, but obviously as a writer, but it is a very strong influence.
So anyway, please check that out if you get a chance. It's in the description below. I loved it, and I think you probably will too. Take when you have a chance to actually listen. It's a pretty in-depth thing, and so I wouldn't necessarily recommend listening to it while you're doing something else. I actually stopped and like just listened to it, because there's a lot in it, and it helps you to, because it's an audio drama, it helps you to kind of like build the image in your mind as it goes. So we'll be back here maybe in a week or two to talk about season 3. Until then, thanks everyone for joining me and Jonas for this. It's been a pleasure, and we hope you're enjoying it as well. So take it easy, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.